Ailey had just finished his evening chores when the sky, thick with dark clouds, let out a loud crack of thunder. The wind picked up, sweeping the cold rain across the open fields of his farm. Standing by the barn, Ely wiped his brow and glanced at the road that stretched beyond his land, barely visible under the storm. He could hear the sounds of the wind and rain, but also something else. Footsteps, faint, but growing louder. Curious, he squinted into the dark and saw a figure moving slowly along the muddy road. The man was hunched over, clearly struggling against the storm. His coat clung to him, soaked through, and his shoes were covered in thick layers of mud. It wasn't common for anyone to be walking this stretch of road in weather like this, let alone at this hour. Illy took a deep breath, his old bones aching from the day's work, but he couldn't ignore the man. He walked towards the figure, his boots sinking into the wet ground. As he got closer, the stranger lifted his head, his face pale and tired. "Mister, can you help me?" The man's voice cracked, strained from the cold and exhaustion. Ila, despite his cautious nature, couldn't turn the man away. "Come on, you'll catch your death out here," Ella said, his voice gentle but firm. "Follow me. I'll get you out of this rain." The stranger nodded gratefully and followed Ely toward the barn, his footsteps heavy and slow. As they reached the barn, Ely opened the door and motioned for the man to go inside. The warm smell of hay and wood filled the air as they stepped in, the storm's noise dimming as they shut the door behind them. "Thank you," the man said softly, shaking off his coat. He looked around, eyes scanning the humble space. "I didn't know where else to go. My car broke down a few miles back. I was trying to make it to the next town." "You're safe here," Ellis said, pulling an old wool blanket from a nearby shelf and handing it to him. "You can stay the night. It's too dangerous to be out in this weather." The stranger nodded again, a look of relief crossing his face. He spread the blanket over himself, sitting down on a pile of hay. "Thank you, truly. I didn't know who else to ask," he said, his voice growing quieter. Ellis stood for a moment, looking at the man. He was odd. There was something about him that didn't quite sit right, but Ely couldn't place it. His boots were too polished for someone stranded in the middle of nowhere. His coat was too neat, as though it had been carefully tailored. Still, the storm was too harsh, and Ely wasn't the kind to ask too many questions. He had given his word. "Get some rest," Ellis said, turning toward the door. "I'll be back in the morning to check on you." He stepped outside, the rain now a heavy curtain around him, but for a moment he paused. Something lingered in the air, a strange feeling he couldn't quite shake. But he shrugged it off, telling himself that he was just tired. After all, it was just a man needing shelter. Nothing more, or so he thought. Ely couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As he sat by the small fireplace inside his home, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. He had just finished his supper, a simple meal of stew and bread, and was trying to relax, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the stranger in the barn. The man's quiet demeanor bothered him. He didn't seem like someone who'd simply lost his way. There was a certain calmness to him, almost as if he was used to being in control, even in a situation like this. Ellis shook his head, trying to dismiss the thoughts. Maybe it was just the weather getting to him. After all, it had been a long day, and he was getting older. These days, everything seemed to take a bit more effort. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already late, past midnight. The storm still raged outside, and he could hear the rain slapping against the roof. He should get some sleep. With a tired sigh, Illy stood up, stretched his stiff back, and grabbed his lantern. He walked out the back door, the cold night air hitting him like a slap. The barn was just a short walk away, but the darkness and the storm made the world feel smaller, like everything was closing in around him. As he approached the barn, he could hear the low sound of the wind, but nothing else. No movement, no sounds of shifting or settling. It was oddly quiet. He opened the barn door slowly, the hinges creaking. The warm, familiar smell of hay and wood greeted him, and for a moment he felt at ease again. The stranger was still there, wrapped in the wool blanket. He was sitting up now, though, looking out toward the storm through a small gap in the barn door. His eyes seemed distant, as if he were lost in thought. "You all right?" Eli asked, his voice cutting through the silence. The man turned to look at him, his face pale but still calm. "Yeah," he said softly, his voice steady. "Just thinking." Ely nodded and stepped further inside. He set the lantern down on a small table. "You should get some rest. It's not safe out there. The storm's only getting worse." The stranger looked at the blanket and then at the floor, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he was weighing something. For a brief second, Ely felt like he was being sized up, like the man was trying to decide whether to trust him. But the feeling passed quickly, and the stranger finally nodded. "I know," he said, standing up and stretching. "Thank you again. You didn't have to help me." Ely waved it off. "It's nothing, just doing what anyone would do." The man didn't reply immediately. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if he was about to say something else but changed his mind. Instead, he just sat back down, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. Ely stood there for a few moments, unsure if he should say something more, but the stranger's quiet presence made him feel like there was nothing left to say. With a final glance, Ely turned to leave, his boots crunching softly on the hay-covered floor. As he stepped outside into the storm, he glanced back once more at the barn door. He couldn't explain it, but something felt different now. The man was more than just a stranger. Something was off, but Ely couldn't put his finger on it. Still, he did what he always did. He trusted his gut, even if it told him there was more to this story than he understood. Ely tossed and turned in his bed, the sheets tangled around his legs. The wind was louder now, howling through the cracks in the walls, making the whole house creak and groan. He could hear the rain pounding against the roof in a rhythm that made it hard to focus on anything else. He should have been asleep by now, but his mind kept drifting back to the stranger. The way he looked when he stepped into the barn, the quietness in his voice, how he seemed almost too calm for someone stranded in the middle of a storm. Ellis shifted, staring at the dark ceiling above him. The air in his room was thick with the scent of wood and old leather. It was the smell of his life, familiar, constant, and comforting. Yet tonight, it felt different. The usual peace he found in his small farm seemed to have slipped away, replaced by a growing sense of unease. He wasn't one to worry easily, but something about that man lingered in his thoughts. Why hadn't he mentioned where he was from? Why had he been so careful with his words? Eli had lived long enough to recognize when something didn't sit right, even if he couldn't explain why. It was just after midnight, and the wind had begun to calm, when Eli finally decided he couldn't lie still any longer. He threw off the blankets and pulled on his boots. He needed to check on the stranger. It wasn't about being kind anymore. It was about knowing for sure that there was nothing to fear. He grabbed the lantern from the side of his bed and quietly opened the door. The house creaked as he stepped into the hallway, and the cool night air met him as he stepped outside. The storm was easing up, but the clouds were still heavy, making everything look dim and shadowed. The barn seemed quieter than usual, almost too still. Eli walked over, his boots crunching in the mud. His thoughts kept spinning in his head, but he forced himself to focus. No sense in imagining trouble where there was none. When he reached the barn door, he paused for a moment. Everything was dark inside, save for the soft glow of the lantern he had left behind earlier. He pushed the door open slowly, careful not to make too much noise. The stranger hadn't moved from where Eli had left him earlier. The man was still wrapped in the blanket, sitting on the hay, his back straight and his eyes closed. Ellis stepped in, his boots scraping against the hay-covered floor. "You still awake?" he asked, his voice low. The stranger didn't respond right away. When he finally opened his eyes, there was something different about them, something sharper, colder. "I'm fine," he said, his voice steady as ever. But this time, there was an edge to it. Ellie could feel the change in the air. It was subtle, but it was there. "You sure you're all right? You look like you haven't slept." The man gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just tired. I'll be fine." Eli didn't know what it was, but something told him that this man was hiding more than just a broken car. Still, he didn't press the matter. Maybe he was just being paranoid. After all, he had offered the man shelter, and that was enough. But as he turned to leave, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger wasn't the only one who needed rest tonight. Something was stirring, and it wasn't just the storm. The morning came too quickly for Eli. The sky was still gray, and the air was thick with the remnants of the storm. He had barely slept, his mind replaying every moment from the night before. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, he pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The ground was soft from the rain, and a cool breeze tugged at his coat. Illy made his way to the barn, still feeling that strange unease in his chest. The wind had died down, but something about the quiet made everything feel too still, like the world was holding its breath. He had hoped that by morning, the odd feeling he had would disappear, but it hadn't. Instead, it had grown, gnawing at him in a way he couldn't ignore. As he approached the barn, he noticed something unusual, a line of dust rising in the distance. It wasn't much at first, but it was growing, the faint rumble of engines cutting through the stillness of the morning. Eli stopped in his tracks, squinting toward the road. A convoy of military vehicles was coming his way, moving fast, their engines loud and steady. He felt a jolt of surprise. Who in the world would be out here, in the middle of nowhere in the early hours of the morning? Eli had seen soldiers pass through this area before, but never this many, and never with such urgency. As the convoy drew closer, the vehicle slowed, and Eli could make out the black car at the front, sleek and polished, surrounded by jeeps and trucks with soldiers standing at attention. Ellis stepped back, instinctively moving toward the barn. His heart started to race. What was going on? Who were they looking for? He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to run and hide, but his feet stayed frozen in place. The convoy stopped just a few yards from his farm. Soldiers hopped out, quickly surveying the area, their eyes scanning the fields, the barn, the house. It was clear they were searching for something, or someone. Ely felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't a routine patrol. This was serious. A man stepped out of the black car, his uniform sharp and his face serious. Ely could see the silver stars on his shoulder, and he knew right away that this man was important. The general. The general looked around for a moment, his eyes scanning the barn. Then he turned toward Ely, who was still standing in the field, watching them. The soldiers had now moved in closer, eyes trained on the old farmer. The general stepped forward, his boots crunching on the wet ground. "Are you the one who offered shelter to a man last night?" the general asked, his voice strong and direct, not unkind, but filled with purpose. Ellie swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. He nodded slowly, still trying to make sense of everything that was happening. "Yes," Eli replied, his voice steady but unsure. "He's in the barn." The general's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gave a quick nod. "Show us." Ely felt a chill run down his spine as he turned toward the barn. What in the world had he gotten himself into? Ely led the general and his soldiers toward the barn, each step feeling heavier than the last. His mind raced with questions, his stomach in knots. What was all this about? Who was the man he had helped? Really? And why was the military so desperate to find him? The convoy's presence was unsettling, and the soldiers' cold eyes made Ely feel like a stranger on his own land. As they reached the barn, Ely hesitated for a moment before he opened the door. The general's gaze didn't leave him, sharp and focused, as if he could sense Ely's nervousness. The lantern light flickered inside the barn, casting long shadows across the hay-covered floor. The stranger was still sitting where Ely had left him, wrapped in the wool blanket, his face partly hidden in the dim light. "He's inside," Ely said, his voice thick with uncertainty. He stepped aside to let the soldiers enter, feeling small under the weight of the moment. The soldiers moved in quickly, surrounding the man without saying a word. The stranger didn't react right away. He didn't even look up when they approached. Instead, he simply remained still, his eyes closed. Healy's heart raced. He hadn't expected them to move so fast, and now he could feel the tension in the air, thick like the storm that had passed through the night before. The general stepped forward, his boots heavy against the barn floor. "Wake him," he ordered one of the soldiers. The soldier bent down, shaking the stranger's shoulder. "Hey, wake up," he said, his tone more demanding than friendly. The stranger's eyes fluttered open slowly, and for a moment there was only silence. Then he sat up, stretching as if he had been expecting this all along. When he saw the soldiers standing around him, his face didn't show fear or surprise. Instead, there was a quiet, almost resigned calm. "You're looking for me," the stranger said softly, his voice steady despite the situation. The general nodded. We've been searching for you. Your disappearance last night caused a lot of concern. The stranger glanced at Ely, and for the first time, Ely saw something flicker in his eyes. A brief flash of gratitude, maybe even a little relief. I appreciate the shelter, the man said, his words directed toward Ely, but his focus was still on the general. But I think it's time I leave. Ely stood off to the side, watching the exchange, trying to make sense of it all. The man had known the military was coming. He had known he'd be found. But what was his connection to them? The general took a step closer, his expression hardening. You're not leaving yet. We need to talk. Healy's mind raced. Who was this man? Who had he been harboring in his barn? The stranger's calm demeanor now felt unsettling. It was as if he was more than just a lost traveler, more than someone who had been stranded by a broken car. What's going on here? Illy finally asked, his voice trembling slightly. Who is he? The general turned toward him, his eyes piercing. This man is part of a special operation. He's been working undercover, gathering intelligence. And now, we need to make sure he's safe. Illy felt his heart skip a beat. This wasn't just some random traveler. This was someone important, someone caught up in something much bigger than him. And all along, Illy had been unaware, offering shelter to a man who wasn't who he seemed at all. Illy's mind spun as the general's words sank in. Undercover? Intelligence? The weight of what he had just learned hit him like a wave. He had sheltered someone involved in something far beyond his simple farm, far beyond anything he could have imagined. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, his hands suddenly clammy. The barn, once a safe place, now felt heavy with secrets. The stranger stood up, brushing the hay off his clothes. His calm expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes now, a quiet understanding that Ely wasn't just another farmer. He had unknowingly become part of something dangerous. What kind of operation? Ely asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know, but the question was out before he could stop himself. He needed to understand how deep this went. The general glanced at him, his face serious but not unkind. It's classified, he said flatly. But what matters is that you helped him, and we're grateful for that. Illy didn't feel grateful. He felt more confused and worried than ever. He had given shelter to a man who, apparently, had secrets worth hiding. Secrets that involved the military. You've done your part, the general continued, his voice softening just slightly. But we need him back with us. There are things he still needs to finish, things that could be dangerous if left unfinished. Illy took a slow step back, his heart pounding. The stranger, still standing there, gave him a brief, almost apologetic look. He knew he owed Ely some kind of explanation, but there was something unspoken between them, a quiet agreement that it wasn't the time for it. I didn't know who you were, Ellis said, his voice steady but filled with frustration. You looked like just a man who needed help. I didn't expect all of this. The stranger nodded as if he understood. I didn't want to bring any trouble to your doorstep, he said quietly. I'm sorry for that, but your kindness meant more than you realize. Ellis swallowed hard. What had he gotten himself into? He had offered warmth to a cold, lost traveler and ended up tangled in something much bigger than a broken-down car. The general, watching the exchange, seemed to sense Ely's growing anxiety. We'll take him from here, the general said, stepping toward the stranger. There's no need for you to get involved any further. Ely felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Part of him wanted this whole situation to be over, but another part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite finished. He had done his part, but it seemed like the story was far from over. The soldiers moved to the stranger, gently guiding him toward the exit. The man didn't resist, but before he left, he turned back to Ely. Thank you, he said again, his voice sincere. You've done more than you know. Ely stood there, watching as the convoy prepared to leave. The general exchanged a few quick words with his soldiers, then climbed back into the black car. The convoy rumbled to life once again, and Ely felt a strange sense of finality wash over him. As the convoy disappeared down the road, Ely stood alone in the barn, the quiet settling back around him. He didn't know what he had just witnessed or what part he had played in it, but one thing was certain. Life on the farm would never be the same. Eli stood in the barn long after the convoy had vanished from view. The dust left by the passing vehicles still hung in the air, mixing with the faint smell of hay and rain. The silence that followed felt heavy, as if the world had closed in around him, leaving him with nothing but questions. His farm, once a place of quiet routine, now felt like the center of something much bigger, something he couldn't quite understand. He wiped his hands on his pants, trying to shake off the unease that clung to him. Everything had changed in a matter of hours. The man he had helped, the stranger who had shown up in the storm, wasn't just some lost traveler. He was part of something deep and complicated, and Eli had been caught in the middle of it without ever realizing. Ella walked to the barn door and stood in the open frame, staring out at the now quiet landscape. The wind had died down, and the storm was nothing more than a memory, but something still felt wrong. It was like a shadow had settled over the place, one that wouldn't go away no matter how much he tried to ignore it. He heard the crunch of footsteps behind him and turned around. It was one of the soldiers, the young man who had been with the general. The soldier was holding a small folded piece of paper in his hand, his face unreadable. "You Eli?" the soldier asked, his voice low and respectful. "Yeah," Eli replied, his curiosity piqued. "What is it? What's going on?" The soldier hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, handing Eli the paper. "The general wanted to leave this with you," he said, his tone serious. "It's for your eyes only." Eli took the paper, unfolding it slowly. It was a simple note, written in a neat, careful hand. "Thank you for your help. What you did matters more than you know. Don't talk about this to anyone. Stay safe." There were no names, no details, just those few cryptic lines. Eli stared at it for a long time, the words swirling in his mind. Stay safe. What did that even mean? And why was it so important that he stay quiet? It felt like there was more to this than just a man in trouble. There was something bigger at play, something dangerous. But what could he do now? The stranger was gone, the soldiers were gone, and yet the feeling of unease refused to leave him. The soldier watched him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "You should take care," he said before turning and walking away, disappearing back into the distance. Ella stood there, still holding the note, his heart heavy with the weight of it all. His farm had always been a place of peace, a quiet retreat from the world, but now it felt like a quiet waiting room, waiting for something he couldn't see but could feel closing in. He folded the note and tucked it into his coat pocket, his mind racing with questions. He didn't know who the stranger really was or what the general had meant by "stay safe." But deep down, Eli knew one thing for sure. Whatever had happened here was far from over. Days passed, but the strange feeling that had settled over Eli's farm never really left. The quiet of his daily routine seemed hollow now, as if the world had shifted around him while he wasn't looking. He tried to focus on his work, fixing fences, checking on the animals, tending to the crops. But his mind kept drifting back to that night, to the stranger and the convoy. What had it all meant? Who were those men really, and why had they needed the man he had sheltered? It was late in the afternoon when Eli first noticed something odd. He was in the fields, his hands dirty from working with the soil, when he saw a figure in the distance. At first, he thought it was just his eyes playing tricks on him, a shadow moving with the wind. But then the figure grew clearer, a man, walking steadily across the field toward him. Eli wiped the sweat from his forehead and squinted, trying to make out who it was. The figure didn't look familiar, and yet something about the way he moved seemed off. As the man got closer, Eli's stomach dropped. It was the stranger, the same man who had stayed in his barn, the one the general had come for. But this time, there was no convoy, no soldiers, no military vehicles. Just the man, walking alone, his expression unreadable. Eli's heart pounded as the man drew closer. He didn't know what to think. The stranger had left with the soldiers. Had he come back? What did he want now? "You," Eli said, his voice tense. "What's going on? Why are you here?" The stranger stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady and calm. He looked different now, more tired, more worn, as if the weight of whatever he had been through was starting to catch up with him. "I need to talk to you," the stranger said quietly, his voice low but urgent. "There's still more at stake than you know." Eli felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had been trying to forget, to move past the strange events, but here the man was dragging him back into it. I've already done enough, Ellis said, his voice shaking with frustration. I helped you once, and now you're back here. What do you want from me? The stranger's eyes softened, but there was still a guarded look in them. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need you to understand that what happened before wasn't the end. You were involved, whether you realized it or not. Ellis shook his head, his chest tightening. I don't want to be involved anymore. This is more than I signed up for. The stranger stepped forward, lowering his voice even further. You don't have a choice. You're already in it now. What I'm involved in, what the military is involved in, it's bigger than you or me, but it's coming for you, whether you like it or not. They'll be back. Illy's thoughts raced. The general's warning echoed in his mind, stay safe. It was all starting to make sense in a way that scared him more than he wanted to admit. What do you mean, coming for me? Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger looked around, making sure no one else was nearby, then leaned in closer. They know you helped me, and they know you know too much now. They won't leave you alone. Illy's breath caught in his throat. The quiet life he had known, the peace he had worked so hard to protect, was gone, and in its place, a new, darker reality was taking root. Whatever this was, it was just beginning.